Hi, welcome to another Ask Augustin. Today I'm going to answer some of your questions. I got a lot of questions, so many questions. I'd actually do this live, but unfortunately my internet connection where I am is really slow. Sometimes it takes actually quite a long time to upload these videos. So I took some of them here and I'll answer as many of them as I can. A few of those are actually things that I think I'll eventually make videos about. Like there's one, there were some questions about slides, for example. I think I'll actually make a separate video on that. See here were a few questions about spiccatos. I mean, there's a lot I could say about spiccato, but the main thing for me is that it has to be quite loose. That you find, not unlike with ricochet, you find the right point to jump your bow in terms of how close you are to the tip. And you try to jump it with a wrist motion as loosely as possible. When you have passages where you need to project but also play spiccato, it's actually the same thing. You just basically increase the wrist motion in order to throw your bow in a stronger way. Something in concertos. I mean, there's the passage in Tchaikovsky concerto is a little harder because it's in triplets, but it just has to be quite a lot of wrist action, wrist shaking. But you kind of practice first maybe the piano version. Then eventually you try to increase the projection of that. Spiccato is always harder when there are a lot of string crossings. Sometimes you actually have to choose fingerings with the string crossings at the right moment because it's slightly easier to cross the string upwards when the next note on the first note on the upper string is on an up bow. So sometimes that can help a little bit, but otherwise you just have to keep in mind where those string crossings are and kind of figure out those little corners. Practice makes perfect, I guess. Let's see. Got some questions about staccato. So staccato is something that, upward staccato that is, it's something that most people are not don't feel so great while they do it, and actually, funnily enough, you really don't need it for most great music written for violin. So there are plenty of violinists who've made wonderful careers who can't play staccato, and they never really had to. But the thing about staccato, I had to work a lot on it a few years ago when I was practicing a lot of Paganini caprices. I think everyone who can do a good staccato does it slightly differently. The easiest way to learn is to start at the tip and kind of press down and do these little motions with the arm. I find though that the sound quality is better when I find a way to do it when I'm a little bit looser with the hand. So I'm actually quite loose on the wrist. It takes a lot of experimentation. You can look at how other people are doing it, but ultimately I find that everyone who has good staccato actually finds slightly their own way. The main pointer is do as many notes as you can when you're close to the tip, because as you get closer, it gets harder and harder to keep going. I eventually start going off the string usually when I get close to the frog. I find that I can do a few more like that, but like a transition from on the string to off the string. But there isn't really an easy way to explain it. You have to just experiment until you get the feel for that. But yes, do as many as you can when you're close to the tip, because it's easier over there. I got a bunch of questions actually about shoulder rests and why I play without a shoulder rest, what I use. So I use a cushion that's underneath my shirt or underneath my suit, whatever I'm wearing, and it's actually it's a very simple cushion. It's very cheap. It's called the Zaret shoulder cushion, I find that it works pretty well because it sort of sticks to the fabric, doesn't really slide around, and it gives me enough height with the violin. Because one of the main drawbacks with playing without a shoulder rest, when you play without a cushion, is that it's easy for the violin to point down too much, to kind of get into this sort of posture, which is not great for sound production. You don't have the best leverage with your bow, and a lot of things become harder. When I actually grew up, I didn't use a shoulder rest, and my neck was not so long, so it was actually fine for many years until I became a teenager. My neck got a lot longer, and that's when I needed to start using a cushion. I think that the main advantage to not using a shoulder rest is that you're a little bit freer, actually. You can move the violin sometimes sideways in order to reach certain things better, and because everything is a little bit more movable, it's actually easier, I think, to avoid tension in the neck and shoulders, because with a shoulder rest you are kind of in one position all the time, and that's I think one of the challenges. The hard thing the thing that's harder with playing without a shoulder rest is, of course, that shifting down is harder. You need to know always when to hold the violin with your chin and be quite secure with that, so that the moment when you kind of relax your grip with the left hand and shift down, that you don't feel like the violin will fall out of your hand. So that takes some getting used to. It's actually more of like a feeling, like a fear, I think, that people have, but it becomes second nature when you're used to it. I think it's much easier to go from playing with no shoulder rest to playing with a shoulder rest than the other way around. So if you're used to playing with a shoulder rest and you're not happy, you might also just want to try a lot of different types of shoulder rests, because there's some that are actually really customizable, and you might find something that's much more comfortable than what you're used to. Some of them also sound much better than others, because some of them, as they clamp down on the violin, actually mute a lot of the sound. So it may be a question of experimentation to find what you're happy with. Got a really great question about some tips on how to write a cadenza. I love writing cadenzas. I think it gives you like a different perspective on the piece when you start trying to write music with that material. The next time you play the concerto, you somehow feel differently about it. You start playing it differently. I think that the best way to get started on it is to kind of think about your favorite moments of the concerto. What are the parts of the concerto you love the most? Maybe some parts that you want to bring back in the cadenza. So this could be a starting point. Kind of start improvising maybe on some of those ideas, and you can also do it on pen and paper. Just like start getting a lot of ideas and start playing those, and then think about how to put them together. That's generally how I've done it. With some pieces, when you with Mozart cadenzas and also in the Brahms concerto, when the concerto is already so perfectly structured that you write a cadenza for, then I find the hardest thing is in the end to find a form or a structure of the cadenza that really fits into that. That's not too long, that kind of has the right dramatic structure. So sometimes the hard thing about it is to be able to edit things down and actually cut things, discard things. Even though you really like the idea you had, you're gonna say, I'll throw it out anyway because it doesn't fit. It needs to have a certain shape. And sometimes that's kind of painful when you're really happy with an idea you had, but you have to decide, I won't use it after all because it needs to have this length, it needs to have this shape. That can be quite a long process to figure out how it fits in it, and it's natural to revise your cadenzas many times, even cadenzas that we think of as real classics, like the Joachim cadenza to the Brahms concerto. He made many versions actually until he arrived at the one that we know. So it took him quite a while as well. So it's normal to not be satisfied and keep wanting to change it. And I got a great question also about injuries and how to prevent them. And I think this is very important actually. People don't talk about people generally don't talk about injuries in our field. When people are injured, they just don't talk about it and kind of hide it. It would be maybe better if people were a little bit more open, because it is something that's quite normal, and it happens to most players that at some point they have an injury. At one point I had some tendinitis in my left index finger, and I know that it can be very tough to deal with, because you have this uncertainty. What if this becomes a permanent problem? You know, what's gonna happen? In my case, it was it had to do also with the fact that I was carrying suitcases and while traveling, so that contributed to it. But in my case, I realized that I was sometimes actually moving the finger way more than I needed to. So as I was recovering from the injury, it was actually a chance to kind of examine the motions I was doing with my left hand and how to be a little bit more efficient. I had a habit of, when I was playing, always with the first finger constantly going up and down, like really big motions. And nowadays, when you watch me play, I actually often leave it pressed much more. I kind of don't. I realize I don't have to move it as much as I was actually. So in a way, it was in hindsight useful, but of course it was very hard to deal with. It depends very much what injury you're talking about, but something like tendinitis, if you just kind of take it easy for a while, really warm up slowly, and cool your hands after you're done practicing, take long breaks, you can get past it. And it might be just a sign to try to avoid tension in general, which I think should be always our goal, because as we get older, we're more prone to injuries. So we always have to, in our practicing, think about ways to decrease the amount of tension that we have while we play. I hope some of these are helpful. I'll probably make another video like this in a couple of episodes, because I'm getting so many great questions. And I'll see you next time.